Hello, everyone. Ross here at Teacher Toolkit. I've not done a live stream for quite some time, but I've got a special reason. It's not every day you get to talk to one of your education heroes, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jared. Jared, could I get you to introduce yourself? Because you're based over in the States, you're from Australia, you're thinking about moving to Italy, and you're a kind of global educator. Can you fill in the blanks for me and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, no worries. And hello, everybody. So I am a teacher turned neuroscientist. So most of my teaching, I cut my teeth over here in the US. So I was born and bred here. But back when I was teaching, that was the decade of the brain. So everyone was talking brain, this and that. So I figured, oh, cool, that sounds good. I go learn that. And I thought that would only be like a year of my life. But then I met my wife, who is Australian. So I ended up moving down to Melbourne, was there for 12 years studying neuroscience, psychology. And 2 years ago, we moved back to the US. And now I'm up in Portland, Oregon with a 1-year-old baby and still kind of chugging away up here.
Yeah. And so we connect with, I mean, you don't know I have this to hand, but I've got your book here. And I've been a big fan of your work. And if you've never read Stop Talking, Start Influencing People Watching, it's a brilliant read. And I guess what you do, Jared, former teacher myself, you start to bring all this theory that just makes sense as a teacher. Yeah. And I guess what I've learned from studying the brain and memory is it just changes your perspective on all the things that you used to do as a teacher in a new way.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to just unpick in this kind of short conversation we've arranged is this really abstract concept of metacognition. And I've got a slide that I've put together that I know you're going to fill in the blanks here and critique it for me, but my understanding of something that I really struggled with as a teacher was, how do you articulate what critical thinking skills are? And I guess looking at the right-hand side, I guess it's working backwards on the left here. If we just look at those pink boxes, what would you say if I wanted to describe knowledge of self, knowledge of the task in hand, and knowledge of strategies? How would you help teachers make this flow chart, the theory, practical? Because that's what I really struggle with as a teacher. How do you make the concept metacognition practically applicable and easy to understand?
Yeah, so this is where one of those, and that's an awesome question. I always try and pull it back to kind of basics. If we go back to the very simple stuff, then we can start to ask, okay, what does this all mean for us and our students? And so I think if you figure out all the details aside, what do you need for something like metacognition? One, you need strategies. You need to know what it is you're going to do. And so that's where I think a lot of schools and a lot of programs are really good. They'll be like, hey, here's your study strategies, do this, don't do that. You then need a context within which to apply those strategies. So the idea being like, this is where now a lot of the teacher metacognition stuff says, are you using the right questions? Keep doing exactly what you're doing, but layer in questions that says, why do we just do that? How do you think this links to that? Why do you think on Fridays we always do this? So you give the context within which now you're allowed to think about what strategies you're using and when. And again, I also think most schools are pretty good at that. It's the third pillar where everyone seems to fall down is deep knowledge and understanding of learning itself. Right. You can tell people strategies all day. You can ask them questions about strategies all day. But if they don't understand the basics of learning, period, then it's cool. They'll repeat back to you exactly what you said. I always think about it like switch. If you take it out of learning and you said, what is meta car repair? Well, I'm guessing you're going to need some strategies to use some tools. You're going to have someone ask you some questions. And you're going to need to have deep knowledge of cars and how they work. Otherwise, you're just following strategies. So when you ask somebody, hey, why'd you fix a car like that? They'll say, because that's what we told them to do. So I think that's where we tend to drop the ball the most is we don't have deep knowledge of the learning process. So if you really want to make metacognition applicable at the student level, that's it. It becomes almost a curricular thing where it's now let's dive into the nuances of learning, of memory, how the whole process works. Now, do you see why this strategy would work? Now, when I ask this question, do you have something to kind of support?
So can I ask you then, why do you think it's important to know this stuff? Because, I was classroom teacher 26 years. I've got my stripes, but I don't think I really ever talked about metacognition for the majority of my career.
Yeah.
And whether that's now we've got a bit more access to online, discussions and connections and easier access to research, possibly. But, when I qualified back in the early 90s, apart from all the theory you might learn through your kind of studies, trained to be a teacher, I didn't really grasp or talk about this concept at all.
If you do it right, so here's the good. I think you're spot on. Good teachers eventually will get there. Very rarely will you see metacognition intuitively embedded within pedagogy in the first 5 to 10 years of teaching, but it will start to come whether you know you're doing it or not, and that just comes with skill and ability. But if you look at, so why does it become important then? If you look at the number one defining characteristic, shared characteristic amongst high-performing students at the university level, so you've made it through K through 12, you're now going on, the number one shared characteristic is metacognition. About 40% of academic variation can boil down to, do you understand the learning process and can you tell me why things work? Mm-hmm. And now for the longest time, we just kind of took that as read. Some kids have it, some kids don't, which then led to the question, can you teach it? And yes, you can. So that's why it's becoming more. I don't think for a long time we knew. I think we were just confident saying it's a trait that some people have and others don't, but it's not a malleable thing. And then we've kind of pulled back and realized, no, it is a very malleable thing. It just requires those 3 levels. So here's an example. So freshman year of college, we used to give freshman seminar. This was at University of Melbourne, and you give a big survey. One of the questions is, can you separate good study strategies from bad study strategies? And about 90 to 95% of kids could. They knew what they should be doing. When you tracked them throughout the year, only about 30% of kids were actually doing it. So everyone seemed to know, but only 30% were doing it. For a long time, we couldn't parse that. But then you ask another question. You say, why would this be a good technique to use? Why, rather than just saying, what should you be doing? You say, why would, say, retrieval practice be useful?
Sure.
And now the percentage of people who know that drops from about 90% to 30%. And that was the 30% of kids who were actually using them. So we saw the difference is everyone knows it, but until you had that deep knowledge of why, no one was doing it. But once you understood why, that's when kids started to do it.
So is there anything else? So I guess the next question would ask is, what's required? We're picking that pink box in the middle, the knowledge of strategies. What's required in here? Are there a group of study skills that research recommends?
Yeah, but I'd say most people already know those study skills. And I think most kids are taught them. I think most schools teach them. What you now need is why. You need to go to that underlying foundation. So that's what we started to do at uni is, rather than teach study skills at freshman year, we started to teach science of learning, which is basically metacognition.
Yeah.
How does the brain process reality? What are the different levels of attention? How does memory work, and what kills memory? What boosts it? What are the actual functions of learning? What is surface learning? What's deep learning? What's transfer look like? Once we taught that, all of a sudden we boosted that number from 30% of kids using strategies up to 65%. So it still wasn't perfect. Like, I'd love to get that up to 100%. Don't know what we got to do with that final 35, but I think that was our kind of big breakthrough. Was we were so focused on teaching them what to do that we never quite figured out we got to teach them why they do it first. Teach the why, not the what. And once they have the why, the what naturally comes after that.
Now, you mentioned a key word for me that triggered in my schema: transfer. I'll be honest, I'm still struggling with a good practical definition of that. Have you got a really nice analogy that you can give teachers to explain what this cognitive phrase transfer means?
Yeah, and I can tell you exactly why you're struggling with it. It took about 6 years for me to kind of parse it together myself. So transfer just basically means, how do I move knowledge, skills, abilities between different contexts? I'm really good at doing math over here in math class. How do I make sure I can also do math when I'm balancing my checkbook at home, which I'm not sure anyone does anymore, but there you go. Good example. So the reason why most people struggle with transfer, and if you look in the lit, you'll find very little written about it. It's like one of those topics that everyone knows, but no one tackles. It's because transfer is synonymous with learning. People are trying to define and talk about transfer as though it is somehow a unique step of the learning process. It is the learning process. So if you look at what's required to transfer, there are basically 3 hurdles you need for transfer: knowledge, context, adaptation. Those are the 3 big hurdles to transfer anything.
I'm going to write this down.
Oh, no worries. I'll send you video on this stuff later. This is one of the things that we do in the
Say those 3 again for me, my benefit. It's CPD for me, everyone.
So knowledge, context, adaptation are the 3 terms you'll typically hear for transfer in the transfer literature, as thin as it is. If you then go to the learning literature, what you'll hear is there are different levels of learning, and you'll typically hear surface learning, deep learning, and adaptive transfer or transformative learning. It turns out those two things are exactly the same. Knowledge is surface, context is deep, adaptation is adaptive transfer or transformative. And the reason now, so more people are cottoning on to the idea that transfer isn't a thing, it is learning.
Sure. So if I give you, could you forgive me for a moment and just articulate how I would describe a scenario and how I might explain transfer to someone else? So maybe in a maths class again, I'm teaching kids the Pythagoras theorem. They really know it. They can always solve the equations. And I guess wanted to mix things up a little bit and make it a real life application, I might take them outside to the side of the sports hall. There's a window about 8 meters high. There's a tennis ball stuck on the window ledge, and we're standing 3 meters away from the building. And I might ask them to apply the Pythagoras theorem in this context outside. Am I on the right tracks here?
Yep. And what you'll see is most kids, even if they're nailing it in class, will struggle to do it out there unless you walk them through it. And so I think that's one of the coolest things. Transfer, just like learning, is a conscious process. And I think most people think transfer, just like learning, should be automatic.
Yes.
That if we've taught you well enough in the past, once you leave, you should be good in the real world. And that simply has never happened, and it never will. So transfer, just like learning, it's something you have to push the system through.
Mm-hmm.
Now, K through 12, you're lucky because basically you have teachers who are pulling you through that. But that does the kids a disservice, because by the time they get to uni, we don't pull them anymore. And now only those that figured out how to do it themselves intuitively can now consciously take the steps needed to go further. Without us kind of
on the grid, then literally everyone, I showed Jared this about 10 seconds before we went live, and you were going to scribe on this. So if we went back to that word transfer, where would that fit in on this graphic?
A transfer is a process emergent from this entire graphic. Basically, if you know, metacognition is the big knowledge of the entire learning process. And in name, or as a part of that, then metacognition is awareness of the transfer process as well. So that's what you'd see is the people who move fastest in the world, the people who transfer fast, like they go into a new job and they're using their skills in 2 months rather than 6 months.
Yeah.
They're also the best learners in the world. The best learners in the world are the ones who transfer the fastest. Why? Because it's the exact same process. You know one, you know both.
Now, you said you're going to red pen this. How would you help develop this my version of metacognition, this graphic, a bit further before we put some of your ideas on the screen?
No, I would just say everything is good. So you've got knowledge of self, and I think that's where I was thinking maybe that's where the depth comes in. So knowledge of task and knowledge of strategies. That's basically, I know what to do. I know kind of when to do it. Knowledge of self is maybe that now why. When we said what separates the kids who use strategies from those who don't, it's knowledge of the system. So if we say knowledge of self and we assume self means my learning process, how does my brain work? How does my biology work? Then I would say we don't have to change a thing. I just had not seen knowledge of, when I read knowledge of self, I immediately think of like mindset or I'm so strong. But in this case, so long as we're saying knowledge of the biological system by which learning instantiates, then boom, I think that actually fits perfectly right there.
Right. So you mentioned earlier, it's about it's the learning process important for kids, and you've developed something called the science of learning. Have you got something you could put on? I think you might need to just share your screen again, Jared, technically.
We did, yeah. So we've got, let me throw up my screen here on this one. Share screen. Because we did and this started with, so it's called the Learning Blueprint. We started with a course for students, which was just exactly what we were doing at university, right? Don't tell them what to do. Is that one coming up?
We've got the QR code one. Do you want to put that full size so we can see it a bit better?
Yeah. Oh, is that I have it full size on my screen. Did it not go up?
It doesn't look like it, no. But I think it's close enough. People can maybe zoom in and scan that QR code.
It's huge on my screen, but what are you going to do? But I think that's what's the for learners one, the metacognition one. That was exactly what we're talking about. Can we teach kids why things work to give them agency over learning? And from that, then we started realizing if you want to extrapolate that, It's real easy to tell teachers, here's some study strategies to give to your kids. Here's questions to ask them. You can give them strategies, you can give them context. But if you want teachers to start then pushing metacognition, they need to deeply understand learning as well. And that was where we were finding that our next kind of point was students didn't understand the process, so we taught that to them. Teachers intuitively know the process, but most of us, I didn't anyway, I was never explicitly taught what learning is. What are the structures? Exactly what you were saying earlier. Until I started diving into the brain, into biology, into neuro, into memory and attention, it never changed what I did. Well, actually, it gave me new ideas, but it just gave me agency. I kept saying, oh, that's why that happens. Or, oh, that's why this works. So that's where we decided, cool, can we teach learning to teachers through a lens of pedagogy so that they have this knowledge deep enough that now they can start to pass it on to their students. So rather than having to wait till you get to uni and then you can take a course on metacognition or what have you, let's just do it directly with teachers, apply it to their pedagogy. Now teachers can teach it to kids too. So that's where we started then bringing all this stuff over to teachers, to pedagogy, to say, does this work with them as well? And lo and behold, it does indeed.
So, I mean, I've seen this platform, but I'm just for people watching, could you articulate, what is this learning blueprint? So a portal of some courses, resources, what's inside?
Yeah, so for the teacher version, for the educator version, it's a portal and it's got 4 big modules. So basically, it's a master's level program in the science of learning. Each module runs for about half a year. It's only about 9 hours worth of learning for each module, but it's not one of those things you want to rush through. There's a lot of reflection, a lot of application time in between. But so the 4 modules are, module 1 is what are the biggest principles of learning. Module 2 goes into what is that learning and transfer structure? What is surface learning? What's deep learning? How do we do it all? 3 goes into kind of those hot topics. What's memory, attention? What is creativity? How do we embed metacognition? And then module 4 goes into kind of what you want to say the more personal side of education: stress, relationships, well-being, motivation, those kind of topics as well. So really that educator course, that's what I used to teach at uni. So that is a massive master's program that you can just access and go through. The student program is much shorter. That's just about a 6-week, there's 18 short 20-minute videos that give them the biggest hits on what learning is, how it works, and then applies that directly to strategies that they basically already know. So it's exactly what we were saying. You know what to do. Can I give you the why? And then see you actually start to apply these things as well. So teachers, it's for pedagogy. Students, it's for practice.
Great. And the website for this, is that the one at the bottom, or is that just your newsletter?
If you go to lmeglobal.net, you'll see you can sign up for the newsletter, but everything else is there too. We've got videos, we got book chapters, everything that you'd want. If you're into the science of learning and you think this metacognition, these kind of concepts are important, tons of stuff we can kind of dig into there as well.
Great. Now, I'm just rambling on with a couple of other kind of questions that I'm keen to ask you. How are teachers receiving the materials, master's level? I'd imagine it's quite rigorous, and there'll be a blend of the academic and practical kind of things. What are your, give us a sense of where teachers are located. Is it American? People here in the UK applicable too?
Shoot, yes. So we've got it going in. It's already, so the program's been translated into 5 languages already. So, I mean, we're in dozens of countries, and it works across the. This is the good thing about biology, right?
Yes, it works anywhere.
It doesn't matter what country you're in. We're all going to breathe the same. It doesn't matter what country you're in. We're all going to digest the same. So it doesn't matter what country you're in. We're all going to learn the same. We might have different pedagogies, things we want to learn.
Yes.
We might have different structures we need to learn through, but the process of learning, the biological mechanisms stay the same. So this kind of information applicable across the board. And the one thing, and I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but the one thing I am known for is I take the complex and I make it meaningful for us as teachers, because that's how I got into it as a teacher.
That's the beauty of being a teacher, isn't it? These synthesizing these complex concepts.
Boom. And that's what most researchers have never been taught pedagogy. They have no clue what teach. They just assume teaching is something you're doing. Right, no. And so I'm lucky enough to be able to bridge the gap, to say, I always say, when I was a first-year teacher, what would I have wanted to know about this? And that's the way I kind of present all this stuff.
That's a good approach. So let me just kind of do maybe a kind of curve towards, what drives you a little bit, what you're up to. You're not living on the website full time all the time. What are you doing day to day? You're in schools?
Yeah, working primarily with schools. So back here in the US, it's funny, most of the schools that are, you've got West Coast, East Coast. West Coast is considered the innovative coast, and
Right.
East Coast is considered the traditional coast. But believe it or not, when it comes to education, East Coast puts so much more time, effort, energy, and money into it. They care about it. West Coast is like, yeah, kids will figure it out. Here's a computer
Right, that's
program.
interesting. I wonder what
So I'm always flying to the
you
East. I happen to live on the West, and I just got to fly out to the East basically every day to work with schools.
might have a North or South equivalent here in the UK, but pockets of innovation in the various parts that I see on my travels. But I guess that's the that kind of traditional understand of different pedagogy in different parts of your own country.
And they push it. And it's funny. I love the innovative stuff is hilarious because they're like, computers will solve the day. Computers have never solved the day. Even high tech high doesn't use computers anymore. It's like they keep thinking we're just going to keep throwing it at you.
What are the kind of innovative things they're doing on the West Coast? Is it
they're trying to basically replace school with AI campuses, which is hilarious because if you saw Saul Khan, so I had to give a talk with that guy. I do a lot of conferences too. These people have no clue about learning. These are tech people who have never stepped foot in a learning system. And so they just assume if I make it good. Here's like basically all you need to know about the West Coast tech movement. If you look at all the research, historically, we've said the best thing you can do for learning and teaching is one-on-one tutoring. And we call that the 2 sigma problem, right? One-on-one tutoring, you get 2 standard deviations, better outcomes than anything else you can do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no way we can do one-on-one tutoring with kids because there's too many kids and not enough teachers. In swoops technology, in swoops AI, we've solved the problem. But wait, here's the real problem. The whole 2 sigma problem started with Harold Bloom of Bloom's taxonomy back in, I think it was 84. He said this based on data from 2 PhD theses. These weren't even published things. These are just his kids published these things. Mm-hmm. Everyone's been talking about it for 30 years since. But the data never panned out. We have now 30 more years of data of one-on-one tutoring. It doesn't have 2 standard deviations impact. It doesn't even have 1. It's closer to 0.24. The effect size of individualized instruction is about 0.24, which is decent, but it ain't great.
No.
Now let's compare that to the impact of having a strong, empathetic teacher-student relationship. 0.67. So wait a second. You're telling me that the way I teach you, the stuff I teach you, and even the tools we use to teach you are less important than the person doing the teaching? Yes, said every single teacher who's ever been in a classroom before. We've known this intuitively. Now we have the data to show you. The teacher is the glue. You get rid of the teacher and just say, hey, AI can give you exactly what you want.
Yeah, well, all teachers will be able to tell the answer to that one. How would you summarize the East Coast then in your neck of the woods?
East Coast cares about teachers. East Coast is the traditional. They are old school. School is school. You come here, you work. They have high standards. It's not an easy system over there on the East. Mm-hmm. But that's why I like it, is they still get the best score. I mean, when you look at performances, whether you like test scores or not, even if you just look at graduation rates, East Coast trumps the West Coast. It's because they care.
Are you working on any new books at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm working on a big project now on Genius. I'm doing a documentary on Genius. Is Genius born or is it made? And in the back of that, I've got a book, because there's only so many things you can do on a doco. So the book is going to let me get a little more nuanced into the kind of specifics of each of the topics. But that's my big thing going on now for the next year or so.
And just one more plug for the Science of Learning. What's driving you? What's the kind of goal for this?
For the learning blueprint is to get it out. So like, when I work at uni, you get about 30 students a year that you can teach science of learning to.
Yeah.
And then you go into schools, you're still kind of tied to me. How many schools can I get to in a year? Not many. So the idea is I want to get this information out wider. So it's not tied to me being next to you. You can still access all the thinking, and you can still access me. I'm easy to get a hold of on email without me having to somehow get on a plane and figure out the right time to get over there and do it.
I think what we might do, Jared, maybe in early July, we might meet again online if we've got enough interest for people. Maybe you'll give us a little demo of the software and the course and things like that. Yeah,
would love to, and then we can pick another topic too, and kind of use it and go
right.
deeper into
I'll
a
use it for my
specific
CPD
topic.
as well. Right,
Love it.
fantastic. So I'll say goodbye to everyone watching this. Thanks for just jumping in the short call. Jared, remind us of your website again for everybody.
lmeglobal.net. So learning made easy. Global.
There you go. Right, it's a pleasure, young man, to talk with you. I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everybody. Thanks for joining us.
See y'all.